Well, praise the Lord, everybody. I'm just so happy to be here. I was so surprised to see my friends, Danye and Trinice, come this morning. They said, well, the Lord just told us to come. We didn't know you were speaking. We didn't know anything. The Lord just told us to come. So I'm was so happy to see them. And also wanted to let you know that my birthday was yesterday. And I can't tell you how old I am because I know there'll be some preconceived ideas. You know, when you tell people your age, they come up with all kinds of ideas. And so I just, but I'm up there. I'm up there. I have 10 grandchildren and 4 daughters and 10 grandchildren. And I retired in 2015, so that kind of tells you something. But anyway, I'm so thankful that Pastor asked me to come and share this with you. He has given us so much valuable information, hasn't he? I mean, it's just very valuable. And yes, we ought to want to know who we are. Isn't that funny? Everybody else knows who they are, but we don't. All we know about ourselves is what was told us by some people that really didn't care about us. And a lot of what was told to us is not true. Now, I'm not in any way a racist. I'm not promoting racism. I'm not promoting any kind of hate or discrimination. I love people. I love God's people. That's God's heart. For us, his heart is people. And how we treat each other, that's what God cares about. So I'm a believer in Jesus Christ, the righteous, and I love people. But I also know that there's a lot of misconception, a lot of deception out here. And I think that because God has given me this knowledge, that he wants me to share it. Now, I wrote a few books. I wrote this book called The Impact of Slavery on the Academic Achievement of Black People Today. This was my thesis when I was getting my master's degree in college. And I turned it into a book. There was a lady there, my instructor told me, don't do this. She said, you can't do that. You can't write about that. I said, why not? She would not, she turned me over to the head of the department. She said, I can't deal with that. And she would not, she had to give me a grade. She gave me a good grade. She said, well, you're a good writer. I said, well, if I'm a good writer, then that's all that matters. Just give me my A, you know. And so she gave me an A-, but she really hated the fact that I was writing about this subject. Also, I have another book called Discipleship on the Move. This is a manual for teaching people how to be disciples of God in these last days. It teaches you scriptures. You have to go through and you have to read these scriptures and you have to find them and you have to write about them. And so it helps you to know, and when you know the word, you have confidence. You don't have confidence if you try to tell somebody about God and you don't even know the word. So this was designed to teach people scriptures. And now this last book is what I'm going to be talking about today. It's called Now I Know Why Jesus Wept. The scriptures are based on Luke 19:41. Now as he drew near, he saw the city and he wept over it because the people didn't know him. They didn't know the time of their visitation. They didn't know who he was, and he wept over the city. He said, you of all people should know who I am because Moses told you that I was coming. But when they did not know him, and he said, how I wish today that you of all people would understand the way of peace. But now it is too late, and peace is hidden from your eyes. And so for many, many years, if you read over in Romans 11, you will find out that it talks about how he diminished us as a people because we didn't receive him, that because of our rejection of him. We were diminished. But then he said, it's only until the age of the Gentiles is over. And now, and we know that these days, the age of the Gentiles is just about over. He said, after the Gentile age, after I bring in all the Gentiles, then I'm going to restore you. I'm going to restore the Hebrews and raise you back up to the status of where you were before. And so this is all in Romans chapter 11. You should read that for yourself. But today I'm going to talk about this issue of race, because it is such a, it pervades everything that we, all the problems that we've had economically and spiritually, socially, politically, everything has been, all of the decision-making has been based on this idea of race. And today I'm going to say that there is no such thing as race. The Bible talks about all those people, as Pastor said, were black people in the beginning, but then something happened, and let's find out how we have all these different colors in the world. Because before slavery, it didn't matter what color you were. They didn't care about color. There was all kinds of people in the world. Color wasn't an issue until the 1600s. And then it became an issue, and why? Because of slavery. Now, I will start this presentation off by giving you definition on race, ethnicity, and racism. Race, and these, I'm going to read these are taken from the Encyclopedia Britannica and the dictionary. Race is the idea that the human species is divided into distinct groups on the basis of physical, behavioral differences. Genetic studies in the late 20th century refuted the existence of race, of different distinct races, and scholars now argue that races are cultural interventions reflecting specific attitudes and beliefs that were imposed on different populations in the wake of Western European conquest. So this idea of race was imposed on us. It wasn't real. Now, ethnicity refers to the identification of a group based on cultural distinctions. In other words, you become a people when you have a similar history, you guys eat similar foods, you dress similarly, habits, beliefs, values, and so forth. And language, you know, we have our own distinct language in the black community, and a lot of other communities try to imitate us, but we have our own culture, and that's ethnicity. And then racism, this is from the dictionary, racism is the belief that some races are inherently, or in other words, they were born superior physically, intellectually, or culturally, and to others. They were born superior to others, and therefore have a right to dominate them. In the United States, racism, particularly by whites against blacks, has created a profound racial tension and conflict in virtually all aspects of American society. And this is dictionary.com. Now, as I move through this presentation, you're going to recognize that all of the political, economic, and social events that developed as a result of this concept of race started right around the time of American slavery. The following is a conventional, I'm going to read this from the Encyclopedia Britannica. This is the conventional accepted view on race. This is, you know, what the average person feels about race. This is what the encyclopedia says about it. Not, not that it's true, but this is just what the average person feels. And the article is called Race as a Mechanism of Social Division. The idea of race was first used in the English language in the 16th century. The word race wasn't even in the dictionary until around the 16th century. There was a word race, I think it was in French, but it didn't have anything to do with people, you see. Now, this ideology or racial worldview is a systematic, institutionalized set of beliefs or attitudes that it includes these following components. This is what this encyclopedia says people believe. That all people in the world can be divided into separate and discrete, exclusive populations called races. A person can belong to only one race. Now, phenotype means physical features. Your features are what causes you to become a part of a race. They can look at you and tell, you know, what race you are just by your physical features. And then this is so weird to me because it says that, you know, that sometimes you can't really tell what race a person belongs to. They're white, they look so white. I have cousins like that. I met one of my cousins on the elevator. I said, I'm going to the Lee family reunion. He said, I am too. There's no way you could not tell me that he was white, but he was. Because we come from Robert E. Lee. We were from his plantation. And this man, he had 14, his mother had 14 children, and he was the youngest. We found out who the slave woman was and everything that had all of us. But we have a family reunion every year called the Lee Family Reunion. And I'm telling you, you'd be shocked at all of us. Some of us were in Africa, some of us, there were over 250 of us at that reunion at the time. And it was really a shock. So now, this you can't tell. So what do scientists call this when you can't really tell what a person is? They call it racial essence, whatever that means. There's something about you. I know you belong to the black race. You know, racial essence. Now, each race has distinct qualities. Now, listen to this. This is just ridiculous. Each race has distinct qualities of temperament, morality, disposition, and intellectual ability. So this means that if you belong to a particular race and your morality is a certain way, then you must belong to that race because you're not very moral, or your temperament you must belong to the black race or white race because of your temperament. That makes no sense, and it's all linked to what you look like, your phenotype. Now they say that it goes on to say that races are unequal. They can and should be ranked on a gradient of inferiority and superiority. This biologist, Louis Agassiz, observes, since races exist, we must settle the relative rank among them. We must rank them, and with the Caucasian on top and everybody else on the bottom. Now, they say that these physical attributes of each race are inherited and innate, therefore fixed, permanent, unalterable, they can't change. And races should be segregated and allowed to develop their own institutions, communities, and lifestyles separate from those of other races. And of course it says that racial ideology is arbitrary and subjective, which it is, but it is a convenient way to organize people within structures of presumed permanent inequality. And this whole ideology was institutionalized and in law. They made a lot of laws in those days regarding race, and we went through all that era of Jim Crow, and where you could only go to a white bathroom, a white I've seen that, those where I could only go to a white bathroom. There was a time when I couldn't go to a theme park because of the color of my skin. So these were all social and institutionalized practices that resulted from this idea of race. Now, this guy, a German anthropologist named Johann F. Blumenbach, in 1775, proposed one of the earliest classifications of mankind based on physical features. He came up with this hierarchy of mankind based on physical features. He was an archaeologist. He collected skulls, and he found what he thought was the most beautiful skull in the Caucasus Mountains. And he said all other skulls must be derived from this skull. So he came up with this idea that it must be different races of people. He categorized everybody into particular races. And he's not the only one. There were others before him, but he was one of the most prominent ones. And of course, he was born in where? 1775, right around the slave era. And so that skull, this is not very scientific if you think about it. You're basing all your whole premise on a skull that you found. How scientific is that? You know? And so that's how it's all started. This was on pbs.org in 2003. This was what they presented. So I'm going to look at this idea of race and how it has impacted every aspect of American society. And it laid the foundation for different scientists to come up with all kinds of weird scientific beliefs that in order to perpetuate or to keep race, this idea of race going. This whole idea of race was just made up. It wasn't real. So there is no such thing, and then I'm going to go on and show you why in a few minutes, but Samuel Morton, and he was called the father of scientific racism and he was born in 1799. And so he thought that humans were, there were different species of humans. And we know that's not true. But he felt like you could determine the intellectual capacity of people by the size of their skull. He was also a skull collector. Now, he said people with a big skull were very intelligent. And little skulls, your intelligence was diminished. That's very scientific, right? And then Sir Francis Galton, he was the father of eugenics. And all this information is in the encyclopedia and online. You can get it and read it for yourself. This is nothing that I made up. Sir Francis Galton is the father of eugenics. Eugenics is the belief that you can take reproductive, you can manipulate the reproductive system of humans and create characteristics, desirable characteristics. They all believed in back in those days, a lot of the scientists wanted to develop a superior race of people. So they came up with this idea of manipulating the reproductive system. But it was eventually discredited because the Nazis got a hold of it and they wanted to a superior race of people, and Hitler and all. So once that happened, it was totally discredited, and we know that it's just not true. And so Charles Darwin, also, we all have heard of him, I'm sure. He was a theory of evolution. We as believers don't believe in evolution. We believe in creation. God created all of us. We did not come from monkeys. Nobody came from a monkey. And it's still a theory because they've never seen a monkey turn into a human being. Nobody's ever seen that. Somebody said that they saw it one time, but it's on some island in the Pacific. But guess what? They say the island sunk. So they still did. They still don't have proof. You know, they came up, they come up with something. So now his theories, Charles Darwin, although he was himself, he was an abolitionist, but the dictionary, the encyclopedia says social Darwinists, people that believed in what he taught, inspired or contributed to some of the most racist and classist social programs in the last 150 years. They just took his theory and ran with it and came up with all kinds because they wanted to eliminate what they call the weaker races. They wanted them to become extinct. And this is what the eugenicists taught, all that about eugenics. They felt like it was all right to get rid of races of people that were undesirable. I mean, they had programs where they were sterilizing young women, unmarried women, so that because they felt like if they procreated, that they would, you know, it would continue with these weak races. So they wanted to get rid of these weak races. And so all of this thinking back then, it just to get rid of. And as I said, it happened during the whole slavery era. They were just coming up with ideas to show that we were inferior. The economic reasons for racial classification was a perfect excuse for slave owners. Perfect excuse. For example, Thomas Jefferson, he said, I believe that the slaves are inferior physically and mentally to whites. And we know how ridiculous does that sound. You know, they were physically inferior and mentally. Well, he had to come up with some reason why he owned 600 slaves. You see, they had to do a deliberate economic campaign to promote and solicit the support of every white person and every white institution, both social and governmental. It was a campaign of separation and subordination, and their basis for this whole campaign was they are less than human. So it's all right to enslave them because they're not really human anyway. You see? So this is what they were trying to do, and they eventually, you see, slavery flourished because of this belief. If you're not a human, it's all right to put you in slavery and treat you any kind of way, because you're not human anyway. So this is what they came up, and it was a campaign because everybody didn't accept it at first. There were a lot of people that came over here that were white indentured servants, they were black indentured servants. They could buy their way out of slavery. But then they came up with this idea, well, blacks, it's not that many of them here. We can keep track of them because of the color of their skin. White slaves, we can't keep track of them. They could just blend into society. And the Indians, of course, they knew the terrain too well. We can't keep up with them. So let's just take the blacks and put them and make slaves of them. And you'll find, when you get this book, you'll find all about that, how they did, the laws they came up with, and everything. I have testimonies of slaves in there and some of my own experience during the time of, in the 60s when you know, all this racism it was going on. So now I have some scientific studies here that I want to read to you to show you what scientists are saying now about this idea of race. The first study was published, it was done back in 2017, and it was done in the Science magazine called Science. It traces how genes changed over time as they travel around the world. We all know about genes. We're made up of genes and chromosomes and all of those things. You remember that in biology. And so these scientists trace these genes around the world through, of course, they were studying people. But they trace the genes around the world. And they say, while dark skin and some Pacific Islanders can be traced to Africa, gene variants from Eurasia seem to have made their way back to Africa. And some of the changes responsible for lighter skin in Europeans turns out to have ancient African origin. And the study number 2 says the changing color of skin is part of a developmental process, but that's not the most important discovery. A recent landmark study revealed on skin color diversity. A team of international scientists found that a large proportion of African origin people had gene changes that are responsible for lighter skin. So all these genes that they're finding were present in African people, and these particular genes were responsible for lighter skin, is what they're saying. It says 2 genes, HERC2 and OCA2, associated with light skin, eyes, and hair in European, arose in Africa. Says the study published in Science journal, in fact, people in Africa have almost every skin color on the planet, from the deepest black in South Sudan to beige in South Africa. And this was a 2020 study. So all these genes and the idea of genes changing and so forth, all of these genes, the characteristics come from African people. And of course, as they moved out into the world, things changed. And number 3, I think this study is the most significant. It says, a landmark 2002 study by Stanford scientists, this is Stanford University, examined the question of human diversity by looking at the distribution across 7 major geographical regions of 4,000 alleles. An allele is, what is an allele? It's a different flavor of a gene. In other words, for example, all humans have the same gene that code for hair. There's no, we don't, because your hair is a different color or texture, hair is hair. And there's only one gene that codes for hair. But they say the different alleles are why hair comes in all colors and types. So you may have different alleles, and allele is a flavor, they call it here. These scientists call it a different flavor of the gene. But an allele is a part of a gene. And so because your hair may be kinky or your hair is straight, it has to do with the different flavor, a kind of gene. And then it says, if separate racial or ethnic groups actually existed, we would expect to find trademark alleles and other genetic features that are characteristic of a single group of people. But there are no trademark genes that code for white race. There are no trademark genes that code for black race. There are no genes that code for race. The alleles and all of the different characteristics of people have to do with a lot of different factors, and I'm going to go into them in a few minutes. But it says, furthermore, it says, however, the 2002 Stanford study found that only 7.4% of 4,000 alleles were specific to one geographic region. So it says, furthermore, even when region-specific alleles did appear, they only occurred in 1% of the people. So because you were in a specific region, your alleles, what caused your hair to be a certain way, only occurred in 1% of the people. Hardly enough to be deemed a trademark. You see, because you come from this area, there's no trademark that says that you are a white or your genes produce a certain kind of people. It says there is no evidence that the groups we commonly call races have distinct, unifying genetic identities. In fact, there is ample variation within so-called races. In other words, if you are a group of people that have, for example, black people, there's many, many variations of alleles among us. Look at us. We're all different colors. We're all different shapes and sizes, and so there is no trademark gene that says I'm of the black race and I'm of the white race. And we've already established that whole idea of race is false. It's somebody's idea, and they came up with this idea because they wanted to perpetuate the this distinction between us as a people, to put us down, to say we're better than you, and you're not as good as us. So now we do have, of course, we have our own culture, which is good. I mean, our people have a wonderful culture. And there are other peoples that have their own culture. There's nothing wrong with that, ethnicities and cultures. Because we all live in a certain area, or we all come from different areas, or come from different people. We have, I mean, when you see black people in down south, they're just like people up here. I mean, there's no difference. We speak the same thing. They have the same slang, everywhere you go, from East Coast to West Coast, black people are the same because they have this ethnicity. We come from a specific culture of people. We speak certain languages. We speak, well, they used to call it, I don't even remember what they called it, but we have our own way of speaking to each other. And then we can also, what's up? We can do that, and then we can say, well, hello, how are you? I mean, we can do that. When we get among ourselves, we just have a different way of speaking to each other because we grew up together. But when we're out and we have to, we can speak the English also. So the consensus is clear. In the biological and social sciences, it is clear race is a social construct or concept, not a biological attribute. Today, scientists prefer to use the term ancestry to describe human diversity. Ancestry reflects the fact that human variations do have a connection to the geographic. And that's even before slavery, before all of this stuff. People didn't care what color you were. You were described by where you came from, your country, your region. That's how it was, because we were all different, mixed up people. Now, climate. Anthropologists say that over the centuries, climate has played a significant role in the color of people. There are areas in the warmer regions where you need a lot of melanin in your skin, as Pastor said earlier. You need it. Why? To protect you from the ultraviolet rays of the sun. If you lived in a hot area, the ultraviolet rays of the sun could, had harmful effects. So that melanin in your skin protected you from the harmful effects. The ultraviolet rays of the sun would strip away folic acid, and this was an essential nutrient you need in your body to have healthy fetuses, to raise healthy babies. You needed that, so you needed that melanin to protect you. But then if you move to a cold area, you didn't need all of that melanin. Why? You needed the sun because you get vitamin D from the sun. And if you had all of that melanin, you wouldn't get that vitamin D because the sun your melanin would protect you from the ultraviolet rays. Wasn't that much sun up there anyway, and so natural selection, they call it, adapting to your environment over the centuries, the body has a way of adapting, and we didn't need all that melanin. So we, because we needed to let the vitamin D in. We needed that for strong bones and some people, even today, that's why a lot of people wear sunscreen, because we live in a warm area. And some people stay in the sun too long, the sun would damage their skin. So that's what happened with climate. And I'm sure, as we heard earlier, that Noah and all these people were black people, and they went into these different areas. The Table of Nations, God had told them where to go, but they didn't go right away. They were scared to go. They thought, they were even scared to come down off the mountain. I was reading Josephus. He said they were scared, and they built that tower because they were scared it was going to flood again. And God told them no. He said, you guys didn't do what I asked you to do. You were supposed to go into all the world and replenish, but they were scared. And then so God said, we're going to go down and we're going to confound their language, and so they spread out. But these were all black people. Some of them went north, some of them went east to Asia, some of them went south, some of them went west towards Africa. But over the centuries, as they moved into these different areas and climates, it affected their color. Some of them, and then there's another reason why we are different colors. And this is cultural reasons. There's something called blanqueamiento or bronchiamiento. It became a practice back in the 1800s. I don't know if you know it or not, but the majority of slaves that came from that slave coast, right there in Judah, on the slave coast, the kingdom of Judah, majority of them went to South America and the islands. Many millions of them came here, but the majority of them went to South America on those ships. And so when people in South America, they think they might be, they don't realize that they're just as much African or whatever you want to call it as we are. We were the Jews. We were the original Jews. We came from Jerusalem, and of course they ran us out of there in 70 AD, but we ended up on that west coast of Africa. A lot of us went to Spain, and Spain in the Inquisition, a lot of them went down that west coast of Africa and ended up on that island down there. And so many of us, we were put on those ships, but a majority of those ships, I have a map of it, but I can't show it now, but it shows the majority of people went to South America. Many of them came here, but not as many as went to South America. And so it says that blanqueamiento became a practice in many countries where the ruling class wanted to achieve a culture which was mostly white. So what did they do? Places like Brazil, they imported 1 million white folks to Brazil so that they could mix in with the black people there, because they wanted the country to be majority of white folks. And that was in Brazil. It also happened in Australia. Australia was really big on that. I mean, we were bleaching their children, putting them in tubs of bleach so that they could be white. And it was a whole cultural thing where the leaders of the country, I heard him say, it is my job to make sure that I produce a white country, that we white it out. We get rid of these, and there's a method of doing it. He had come up with a method, which I don't have time to talk about now, but that was happening in Australia. Cuba wanted to do the same thing, but it says, and this was in 1902, it says, though whites came, they did not stay. So the Cuban policy failed, but they wanted majority of their people to be white too. And it's a country, it's a term, blanqueamiento means whiting out. Is the process of whitening by marrying a lighter skinned individual to produce lighter skinned children. So, I mean, isn't that something that, and this all, when did all of this happen? When color was a big deal. Race was a big deal back then. This was back in the 1800s when all this was happening. Now, let's go on the Bible. And I'll just go over this briefly because I know the pastors talked about this. But in the Bible, of course, there was something called the dreaded skin disease, which is leprosy. And if you caught that disease, you turned white. You had sores all over your body, sores in your head. Your hair turned yellow and white. And if you would go once you had to be put out the camp because nobody, it was dreaded skin disease. And so, but if the sores healed and there was not, the sores completely healed, even though your skin was white, you could go back into the camp. And so no doubt they mingled and mixed and married and came up with different color children. Moses, of course, talked about, God told him when God was asking him, he was asking God rather, how am I going to do this? God said, let me show you my power. So he said, put your hand in your garment, and he said, now take it out. He took it out, his hand was white, it said. And then he said, now put your hand back in your garment. The garment, his hand was restored to its original color. And this is in this was in Exodus 4, 6, and 7, the International Version. Now then, in Numbers, Miriam and Aaron, the same thing happened. Miriam turned white. Why? Because God was upset with them because they wanted to be like Moses. They were jealous of Moses because he married an Ethiopian woman, not because she was black, but because she was of a different persuasion, not persuasion, but different beliefs than they, because they were supposed to stick with their own religious people that were Hebrews. But Moses, if you read Josephus, and you read the book of Jasher, you're going to read about Moses. He was a great warrior. He conquered other nations. The Bible doesn't tell us all. But this woman, she was an Ethiopian. Her name was Tharbis. She said she saw how valiant he was and how great he was. She said, I'll give you my city if you marry me. And Moses was trying to conquer Ethiopia at that time. She said, if you marry me. So he did. He conquered, she gave him the city. She turned, I don't know what she told him and how it happened, but she turned it over to him, and he married her. And that's why Miriam and what's his name, Aaron, were jealous and they were mad. And so here's what God said. God said, if there's a prophet among you, I, the Lord, make myself known to him in a vision. I speak to him in a dream. Not so with my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. I speak to him face to face, even plainly and not in dark things. He sees the form of the Lord. The Lord revealed himself to Moses. Why then were you not afraid, Aaron and Miriam? Why weren't you afraid to speak out against my servant? And so the anger of the Lord was aroused against them, and he departed. There was a cloud over the Hebrews during that time where God followed them, and there was a cloud that followed, but the Bible says that cloud departed. And Miriam turned white and leprous as snow. So this is in Numbers chapter 12, verses 6 through 10. And this is the most significant one. 5 more minutes? Okay, this is the most significant one is when Elisha, the prophet Elijah's servant, Gehazi, the prophet Elijah had healed Naaman. He was a commander in the king's army, king of Syria. And he came to Elijah to get healed of leprosy. And so the king told him what to do. And the king Elijah told him what to do. And so he tried to give Elijah some gifts, and Elijah said, no, I don't want them. So when Elijah left, and Gehazi, the servant, ran back and told him, Elijah had told the commander, he said, Elijah's changed his mind. He wants those gifts anyway. And so he gave him the gifts, and then when he went back, Elijah asked the servant, well, where have you been? He said, I haven't been anywhere. He said, well, didn't my spirit go with you when you went and told that lie to Naaman? He said, now, and this is the most significant thing, this is the operative word, he said, this disease is going to be on you and your generation forever. The operative word is forever. So Gehazi and all of his generation would always be white, you see. So I'm just about finished. So we can see that the variations in the way people look are caused by genetic changes, climate, mixing of cultures in different regions, and disease. And there's no such thing as race. And so also another thing that, when people came and invaded different countries, they raped the women. They mixed into all kinds of, I found out that since Robert E. Lee was a general in the Army, he could bring soldiers in, and he'd bring women, the slave women in, and he had give them a bed warmer, he called them, a bed warmer. And so we don't know who we are. And when the women had the babies, he kept the babies as slaves. He didn't have to buy any more slaves. He would just bring his soldiers in there, and they would have babies. And so, we don't know we know as descendants of the slaves, the slave woman, we know, but we don't know who our fathers were. And they were just random soldiers. So this whole thing about race, if we ever get to a point where we know the truth and realize that it's this whole thing about race that is causing all of this confusion in the United States and in the world, that there's no such thing as race. We all came from Africa, and if there's anybody that is a different color, it's because of these different regions, disease, climate, and rape, and all of the other things. But the genes, where do they go back to? They all started in Africa. Absolutely. So I hope you get something out of that. I'm done. I hope you get the books. I have some copies here if you need them, if you'd like to get them. There's so much in here about the history of our people. And this particular book, there's lots of scriptures. Everything is based on scripture. Everything in here. Every other page, there's scriptures. So I didn't come off the top of my head with this. Every other page, it's all in the Bible.